Hey out there, I'm Jeff DeRiso and welcome to another edition of Mind Hack. Today, Facebook is developing brain-computer interfaces, the dark secret at the heart of AI. And is there a war between neuroscience and psychiatry? If you haven't already, check out Newsbud Academy, which is now offering a course taught by our own Professor Philip Kovacevic on the foundations of Anglo-American and Russian geopolitics. We hope to see you there. Our first article today is published in TechCrunch on April 19, 2017, by Josh Constine. The title says, Facebook is building brain-computer interfaces for typing and skin hearing. At the F8 Developer Conference held in San Jose, California on April 19th, Facebook announced that it has a team of 60 engineers who are working on a brain-computer interface that will allow you to type using only your mind and no invasive implants.
So, what if you could type directly from your brain?
Regina Dugan asked the crowd. Dugan is the former director of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, and is the current head of Facebook's hardware research and development lab known as Building 8. She was also formerly the head of Google's Advanced Technology and Projects Group. What the Facebook team wants to do, according to Dugan, is to use optical imaging to scan your brain 100 times per second to detect you speaking silently in your head, and then translate that into text. Dugan emphasized to the audience that this could all be done without the use of surgical implants. Building 8, which was announced only a year ago, is working with several university research programs employing people who specialize in 3 unique areas. These areas are machine learning for decoding speech and language, building optical neuroimaging systems with advanced spatial resolution, and next-generation neural prosthetics. Another Building 8 project is to create skin hearing devices, which let your skin mimic the cochlea in your ear, which translates sound into specific frequencies for your brain. The author points out that this technology could allow deaf people to hear. Now, apparently, neither the author of this article nor Regina Dugan have heard of the Neurophone, which was patented in 1968 and was able to achieve this same result. We discussed the Neurophone on the last episode of Mind Hack. Dugan played a video of a team of engineers using a system of actuators tuned to 16 different frequency bands, which allowed subjects to hear and recognize 9 different words through their skin. Also in the last episode of Mind Hack, we discussed the experiments of Don Justison in 1975, which used microwave pulses to successfully achieve the very same speech recognition result. The article goes on to talk about how this announcement is in a way Facebook's big reveal for Building 8. Facebook hired Regina Dugan a year ago, and then quickly signed collaboration deals with Stanford, Harvard, and MIT. According to their public job listings, the Building 8 department is currently looking to fill roles such as brain-computer interface engineer and neural imaging engineer. The author of the article, Josh Constine, goes on to talk about how this trend of Facebook in researching hardware seeks to capitalize on their 1.8 billion user base as potential guinea pigs for experiments. He rightly points out that advances in technology like these often conjure up images in our head of a dystopian future, similar to the one described in the novel 1984, specifically the idea of the thought police. As much as Facebook tries to position itself as appearing benevolent and compassionate, the author says, they still have a long way to go in convincing a public who is rightly skeptical about advances like these in technology. Facebook's past record of non-consensual experiments on its users does not inspire confidence in its ethics as a company, and no public relations campaign can erase that. What's also curious to me is that this skin hearing device seems to be achieving a result which could already be achieved as early as 1975. Are the engineers of Facebook really ignorant of this background information? I find that difficult to believe, especially considering the fact that Dugan is the former director of DARPA, which has been involved in researching brain-computer interfaces since the 1970s. Regina Dugan, an expert in counterterrorism, began as a program manager for DARPA in 1996 and became the first female director of the agency, serving from 2009 to 2012. It's worth noting that Dugan currently sits on the board of a medical software company called Varian and a social video gaming company called Zynga, known for its successful game Farmville. So what's going on here? Are Dugan and Facebook now involved in a project that publicizes formerly secret military technology from our past in a controlled and seemingly benevolent way? I can only speculate as to the answer to that question. But let's just take a look at one example of how our government intended to make use of a remote sound projection technology in today's Mind Hack Flashback. Today, we flash back to March 17, 1993, when a meeting took place in a suburb near Arlington, Virginia, between U.S. intelligence officials and Dr. Igor Smirnov. Smirnov was a Russian scientist who founded the Psychotechnology Research Institute in Moscow, which was developing a computerized acoustic device allegedly capable of implanting thoughts into a person's mind without their knowledge. An anonymous attendee of the meeting reported to Defense Electronics magazine that officials from the FBI were interested in speaking with Smirnov to see if his device could be used on David Koresh. Koresh was the leader of a cult called the Branch Davidians, who was at that exact point in time engaged in a standoff with federal law enforcement officials in Waco, Texas. Because Koresh refused to cooperate in a federal investigation into his ownership of illegal weapons, his entire congregation were now considered hostages by the FBI. Smirnov's suggestion during the meeting, according to the source, was to send subliminal messages to Koresh during the negotiations, to mimic the voice of God in his head and convince him to release the innocent members of his group. Smirnov's technology, officially called psychocorrection, was known to the intelligence community for some time, as it had been used by the Soviet Union for targeting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan during the Cold War. This is why the meeting was also attended by representatives from the Central Intelligence Agency, Defense Intelligence Agency, Advanced Research Projects Agency, and Department of Defense, who were all concerned with the national security implications of such a technology. Because Smirnov could not promise FBI officials a zero-risk guarantee, coupled with the fact that the device he brought to the meeting was not sophisticated enough to be used in Waco, the FBI ultimately decided against using this device on David Koresh. As a result of this meeting, the United States reached an agreement with Smirnov that Russia would share the technology with U.S. intelligence agencies in exchange for stock in his Moscow company, which was now vastly underfunded in the post-Soviet era. The Waco standoff ultimately ended in tragedy as the compound burst into flames, killing 76 people, including David Koresh. This event is widely considered as one of the greatest failures of federal law enforcement. So clearly, the Advanced Research Projects Agency, now known as DARPA, which attended this meeting with Smirnov, was interested in remote mind control technology in 1993. This is another clear example that remote sound projection technology is on the table for use as a tactic by governments and law enforcement agencies. And that is today's Mind Hack Flashback. The next article I want to look at today was published in the MIT Technology Review on April 11, 2017, by Will Knight. The title reads, "The Dark Secret at the Heart of AI." The article begins by describing a new type of self-driving car developed by researchers at NVIDIA, which relies on an algorithm to teach itself to drive. While this is impressive, it is also unsettling, the author notes, because it is not completely clear to researchers how the car makes its decisions. Information from sensors on the car go through a huge and complex network of artificial neurons, which then produce a resulting command, like the turning of the steering wheel, the pushing of the brake, etc. Though these resulting commands often mimic those of human drivers, engineers at NVIDIA are currently unable to isolate the reasoning for each single action that the autonomous car makes. This means that if the car does something unexpected, they currently have no way of understanding why. The car relies on something called deep learning, which is really just a catchy buzzword for multi-layered artificial neural networks. These networks allow for more complex machine learning algorithms to create machines which can learn and operate autonomously. This problem with understanding how neural networks in the car reaches decisions is the dark secret at the heart of current AI research. The author points out that deep learning has already proven to have great potential to revolutionize entire industries. If engineers can only create an AI that is capable of explaining its decision-making process to its creators. Tommy Jacola, a professor at MIT who works on applications of machine learning, says, "It is a problem that is already relevant, and it's going to be much more relevant in the future. Whether it's an investment decision, a medical decision, or maybe a military decision, you don't want to just rely on a black box method." The author points out that the European Union has recently discussed a regulation that would require companies to give users explanations for decisions that automated systems reached. As of right now, it would be impossible for any system to fully provide these explanations. The author Will Knight also points out that we cannot always understand the thought processes of our fellow humans either, but we use our intuition to develop trust amongst ourselves as humans. How will we be able to develop this same trust with a machine that thinks very differently from the way we think? One example of the mystery of deep learning is the Deep Patient program at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. This program analyzed medical records of patients and was able to predict the onset of certain disorders such as schizophrenia with a higher degree of accuracy than the top physicians at Mount Sinai. Of course, predicting the onset of these disorders is not helpful unless doctors and patients can understand why and then take necessary medical measures. In the early days of AI, the machine's method of decision-making was transparent because it was created based on clearly defined rules by the person who programmed it. That meant that anyone with a knowledge of programming could reverse engineer the decision by simply looking at the code. But then, programmers took inspiration from biology to create machines which learn by observing and experiencing, the way humans do. This new approach has allowed for the explosion in AI tech that produced dramatic results like those of the Deep Patient program. In efforts to understand this black box technology better, a team of researchers at the University of Wyoming, led by Jeff Clune, attempted to trick an image recognition algorithm into seeing images that were not actually there by exploiting the system's patterns of decision-making. One MIT professor, Regina Barzilay, a recent breast cancer survivor, is determined to apply these machine learning methods in the field of oncology. Barzilay has worked with the doctors at Massachusetts General Hospital to develop a system which can identify early signs of cancer in patients. The system takes a new step toward explaining its reasoning by highlighting specific snippets of text which are representative of a pattern that it has discovered in the data. Program manager of DARPA, David Gunning, is currently overseeing the Explainable Artificial Intelligence program at the agency. This program has funded several research projects in academia and industry. One of these projects relies on the research of Carlos Guestrin of the University of Washington, whose team has developed machine learning systems that provide explanation by highlighting examples from datasets similar to Barzilay's algorithm. The author points out that while this shows progress, we are still a long way away from creating neural networks that are truly explainable. Jeff Clune of the University of Wyoming suggests that perhaps AI is similar to humans in that its rationale for decision-making cannot always be adequately explained. He says, It might just be part of the nature of intelligence that only part of it is exposed to rational explanation. Some of it is just instinctual or subconscious or inscrutable. The author, Will Knight, concludes the article by advising us to be as cautious of the explanations given by AI as we are of the explanations given by our fellow humans. I agree with Knight that we seem to be at a dangerous crossroads in AI research, and that what we should do now is reconcile our need for ethical consistency with our desire for material convenience. Our final article for today was published in Scientific American on April 25, 2017, by Daniel Barron. The title reads, "The War Between Neuroscience and Psychiatry." The main subject of this article is a scientific paper which was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association for Psychiatry on March 8, 2017. The paper attempts to apply the principles of neuroscience to the treatment of a common psychiatric disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder. According to the author Barron, psychiatry houses a large contingent of people who believe that the study of neuroscience, which focuses on the mechanical workings of the brain, has little or no relevance to the clinical treatment of patients. In Barron's view, this debate is fueled by competition for funding among different schools of thought in clinical psychiatry. But in his opinion, it is outlandish that the relevance of neuroscience is still contested. In his words, what framework could possibly be more relevant than neuroscience to understanding brain dysfunction? The paper he refers to is the result of the work of a team of psychiatrists led by Dr. David Ross at Yale University, and it outlines 5 key themes of neuroscience that Ross's team gained from previous research on PTSD patients: fear conditioning, dysregulated circuits, memory reconsolidation, epigenetic and genetic considerations. Ross and his colleagues argue that these factors have an effect on physical brain mechanisms, and that understanding these effects can lead to identifying better treatments. The author Barron, with a certain arrogance in his tone, states that the lack of a mechanistic approach to psychiatry is driven by a conflict between an intuitive approach versus a data-driven approach. He compares this professional skepticism with neuroscience to the feeling of disbelief he had as a high school sophomore when his teacher taught him that physical neurons are what created his thoughts. This disbelief that thoughts originate from physical mechanisms is one that many share. However, Barron dismisses this as his own adolescent silliness, and in doing so, compares an entire contingent of the psychiatric community to silly adolescents. I will say that the work of Ross and his colleagues does seem to suggest that neuroscience can help clinicians treat symptoms of PTSD by identifying the physical mechanisms that cause them. However, there is no underlying physical mechanism that causes PTSD itself. PTSD is ultimately caused by a human going through a traumatic experience, which is very difficult to measure in a laboratory setting. In my research for this episode, I came across a rebuttal to this article published a day later in Discover magazine, entitled "The Fake War Between Neuroscience and Psychiatry." The rebuttal, which was published under the pseudonym Neuroskeptic, offers many examples of how psychiatry has been integrated with neuroscience for some time. The author Neuroskeptic also argues that understanding the mechanisms of the brain alone is not enough to treat disease, and cites the examples of many psychiatric medications which were discovered by accident during clinical trials. Neuroskeptic's final statement says, "We can't put neuroscience theory above clinical reality. Down that road lies, well, madness." Interestingly, the title of Barron's article has now been changed on the Scientific American website. It now reads, "Why Psychiatry Needs Neuroscience." This is a much less sensational way to phrase the headline, and is perhaps in response to the harsh criticism of Neuroskeptic. Many of the points raised by Neuroskeptic make a lot of sense to me, and I think this outlines a major point of disagreement in scientists who are studying the human brain. The main point of contention here is whether or not human consciousness is a physical, brain-based phenomenon, Further, Barron's attitude of smugness and overconfidence is something I think is all too common within the scientific community, and it's actually standing in the way of a constructive and open scientific debate. On the other hand, many have criticized the blogger who goes by the name Neuroskeptic for not revealing his or her true identity. But Neuroskeptic responds to this criticism by saying that using a pseudonym is a way of illustrating the fact that the ideas themselves are more important than the character of the person communicating them. I normally think that transparency and openness is a better approach to scientific discourse, but Neuroskeptic raises an interesting point here that causes me to question that. What do you think? Does anonymity help bring us back to a more constructive and open scientific debate? Does it shift the focus away from being on the ego and personality of the researchers themselves and towards being on their results and their findings? That's it for this edition of Mind Hack. Thanks for watching, and please like and share this video with your friends. I'm Jeff DeRiso, and I'll see you next time.
This is a special